In February, I undertook my most ambitious road trip yet. It would see me painting in a forest, on a beautiful, deserted beach, by a waterfall, by a bigger, better waterfall, and on the side of a mountain. Also, I could finish my army for the Scouring of Cheshire tournament in March, and of course to start a petty, pointless squabble with content creator Zorpazorp and the proud nation of New Zealand. And so, early one frosty Saturday morning, I began a road trip covering nearly 1,800 miles, the equivalent of driving from London to Istanbul. Whilst doing it, I'd be painting my 800-point Riders of Theoden Legendary Legion for Middle-earth strategy battle game. I would not be starting from scratch, thankfully, this project having been going on for years, but the models were in varying states of decay, and having travelled further and further and further north, I got them out to have a look at the scale of the challenge ahead of me. Let's have a look at the army and see what we've actually got to do, because you'll see here that a lot of the models are actually either partially, and a couple of them are wholly painted. And it may seem like a cheat. I know that the point in these road trips, generally speaking, is about trying to challenge myself to complete ambitious projects whilst doing ambitious road trips. But if you look in the case, there is a whole hell of a lot of work to do. So yes, we have models that are in a pretty good state, and we've got other models that are in a sort of half base coated state. I mean, this one obviously has got some colours on it, but in a incredibly ramshackle kind of a way. We then have other models that are barely touched, barely started, and yet others which aren't even begun. Considering I've only got 6 days, I've got to do 500 miles in 6 days. In my list is Theoden, Eomer, Dernhelm, and Gambling with Raw Standard. Obviously Dernhelm has got Merry in tow. The only one of those models that is actually completed is Eomer. There are then 16 riders and 3 Royal Guard, and of course we've got to do the foot counterparts as well. I'm not going to be painting horses in this video, but I have done that in a previous video, a video in which I was surrounded by horses and a horse came into the van. It is ruthlessly adorable, and you can check it out with the link in the description. Anyway, after a 13-hour drive after stops had been accounted for, I was very, very much ready for bed. I planned to show you where I was and where I was going in the morning. So, the sun is up-ish, it's doing its best, and it's finally time for the grand reveal, to talk about where I am and where I'm going. Well, where I am is probably the world's most famous body of allegedly monster-infested water. It's Loch Goddamn Ness! Just a few miles west of Inverness, this is the beginning of the North Coast 500, an epic road trip through the Scottish Highlands, known as one of Europe's last great wildernesses. I have eaten my fair share of breakfasts, and then some, most likely, but I am struggling to remember any with a view quite this good. But I couldn't hang around forever. There was a hell of a lot more Scotland to see yet, and I expected it was only going to get more beautiful as the day went on. Okay, well, even beautiful places need a Halfords. It turns out I was having battery problems. The van very nearly didn't start that morning, so sadly, I had to waste half a day getting it replaced. I decided to get the sightseeing going anyway, whatever sites within striking distance of Halfords at least, and that turned out to be the train station. However, I was also close to the UK's northernmost Games Workshop, which was fortunate because I needed some backup supplies before heading into the wilds. There would be no more gaming stores for the rest of the week. It's closed. Never mind, I was excited to get cracking anyway, and when I got back to the van, it was in pristine working order. You can tell I'm excited by the picture-in-picture in the top left because I simply will not shut up.
In short, I'm describing what this trip is about, but I'm going to dub over it because I can do so more succinctly now with a calmer mind. So here's the honest pitch in a nutshell. I am a small, petty-minded man, and I am jealous of the fact that Zorbazorb and other Australian creators have got all the filming locations for Middle-earth on the doorstep. I believe that I can be the standard bearer for fragile Brits everywhere who want to reclaim Middle-earth for the UK.
So here we go, we're crossing the river. This marks the start of the North Coast 500 road trip.
To achieve this lofty ambition, I would travel around the Scottish Highlands and find all the classic Middle-earthy locations. Mountains, waterfalls, rivers, bogs, forests, plains, the lot. In doing so, I would prove that Scotland is every bit as capable of being Middle-earth as New Zealand is. And it wasn't long before I arrived at my first Middle-earthy location. By this time, we'd already travelled almost the entire height of the east coast of the country, and we'd arrived somewhere windy, even by Scottish standards.
Welcome to the Camster Cairns, ancient, giant stone structures in which the dead were interred. There's one over there and one over there, and they're situated on these, as you can tell, very windswept plains. These are actually moors, but you know, they're quite like downs. And I want you, New Zealand, I want you to look me in the eyes and tell me that these aren't the Barrow Downs. Tell me you wouldn't expect to see a Barrow White here if it had featured in the movies. Now, this is the entrance to the cairn. Now, you're actually allowed to go inside. And as terrifying as that prospect is, I do feel quite committed now that I'm here. So, leave the bag out here so that if a wraith inters me, someone will be able to find out where I've gone. Jesus Christ, it's narrow. Oh, this is a hands and knees job. Which is a shame because these are brand new jeans. Jesus Christ. Oh my God. Easily enough room for me to stand, and there'll probably be enough room for me to stand on my own shoulders, or someone else to stand on my shoulders, which would be less weird. 5,000 years ago, burial rituals were performed where I'm standing now. It's pretty fucking incredible. You can imagine Tom Bombadil rescuing some hobbits that were about to be interred alive down here.
So that's creepy, windswept, hilly moors with ancient tombs scattered about crossed off the list. And before you scoff at my idea, I do encourage you to Google the artist renditions of the Barrow Downs. You may find the similarity striking. Anyway, feeling pretty pleased with myself, I left the creepy hillside behind and went off in search of food and rest for the night. However, that was more difficult than I'd expected. Everywhere was closed. This place was deserted. And by this place, I do mean Scotland. This was a shame. I'd been desperate to try the quintessential Scottish haggis, and I couldn't find it anywhere, but the one place that was open had the next best thing, haggis burger. I say the next best thing. The next best thing to haggis might well be no food. But I would not be thwarted. So I pulled into this campsite ready to patronise their cafe based out of a stagecoach bus put up on cinder blocks, confident that they would be able to do justice to my first taste of this ancient Scottish delicacy. But first, there was something else on my mind.
You know, I try not to talk about real world events on these videos because, you know, it's about escapism and it's not about what's happening in the real world. But I just switched on my phone and saw that Putin has put his nukes on special alert. And I think that does tie into the channel because the intro to the channel is, of course, a van that's taken bullet damage, sort of exploding onto the screen through a bunch of flames. And I happen to be sort of in the safe zone. I'm about as far away from, you know, UK civilization as it's really possible to get. So I assume when the nukes fall, they'll obliterate my flat in London I mean other things as well, but the flat amongst them, I'll escape the immediate firestorm, and I'll be left to roam the wasteland, attempting to make pithy comments that fall wildly short of the mark, and trying to find some other way to validate myself once the internet has basically gone down.
Firestorm or not, it was finally time for me to get down and do some serious painting. I'd crack on whilst waiting for my food to be ready.
The first thing I want to do is absolutely catch up with these base colours. So let's start with the iconic Rohan green.
It won't come as any surprise to learn that this bit took a while, as the green is everywhere on these models. The cloaks, the shields, that little bit of cloth between the horse and the saddle. Well, actually really just those 3 things, but that's enough.
2 bits of good news. First, the green didn't take as long as I thought it would, which is great. Second, my haggis burger is here. To be honest, it tastes like burger with a bit more burger on top, so fine, yeah, good.
After this, I did some highly unremarkable basing of lead belcher for these silver bits. Mail coats, helmets, buckles, stirrups and spears all got a good coating.
Silver's done, and we know shit's getting serious because the slipper's going on, and I'm wearing my pyjamas, and you can tell I'm in Scotland because I'm wearing my tartan pyjamas. That's just to show the locals that there's nothing to be afraid of with the English. We really do. We understand. We're not so different.
After clearing that up, it was time to move on to basing the leathers, which I did with Mournfang Brown. This is a surprisingly lengthy stage because there's a lot of fiddly bits of leather to catch, including straps, the horse's reins, gauntlets and the like. Also, whenever I have a brown or a grey or black or white or any kind of hair colour out, I grab a couple of the rider's hair just to make sure I'm picking it up as we go along.
Now, while I'm doing this, you might wonder why it is I've chosen to get into a feud with Zorpazorp. And, you know, Lackey said some really nice things about me, like this in a stream a few weeks ago.
Guys, go and check out the Battle Camper channel if you haven't already. It is probably my favourite Middle-earth content on YouTube. I love it. Alex says, that's the nicest thing someone's ever said about me. Yeah, I'm pretty good like that.
And for that, I am grateful. I'm genuinely grateful. But he also confided in me quite early on plans which I think are now public about moving to New Zealand and doing his own sort of like road trips. And it's not like I can accuse him of copying me because he's been planning this for a lot longer than I've been doing it. But that basically does make him a threat to me, a threat who must be destroyed at all costs. And I feel like if I could rob New Zealand of the title as Earth's Middle Earth and bring that to Scotland, basically, you know, within relative commuting distance, then that will deal a really quite savage blow.
Appropriately, with that bridge having been comprehensively burned, it was time to paint the wood. I did this in Dryad bark. I'm going to assume I don't really need to describe where the paint is going for this section. It's spears, backs of shields, any wood you can find. Please forgive the messy basing at the moment. Words cannot describe how befuddled my brain was at this stage.
Also using Balthasar gold to grab some of the less resplendent gold or brass components.
If I'm in a hurry painting Riders of Rohan, I'll often neglect this step, using Balthasar gold to catch the rims of helmets or the odd link in chainmail, but I've always found it pays dividends. Breaking the metals up is one of those steps that's a bit like the baseline in a track. You don't really notice it consciously, but my god, you'd miss it if it wasn't there. I mixed up where the Xandri dust went. Some of them were wearing these sort of tan trousers and some of them were wearing tan tops. It just stops them looking like clones, which is nice when you only have a handful of sculpts to be working with. Anyway, with my brain shutting down at an alarming pace, it was clearly time for bed. The next day dawned and the wind had not taken a break. It was so intense, it shook the van all night. Now, I am not complaining. I know you don't get to set up camp 10 miles from John O'Groats in February and complain about the weather. However, I say to you, Scotland, I respect the energy.
Okay, it's about 8 o'clock in the morning and I have another rather long drive today, about 3 hours. But this is the exciting one. This is the bit that I've been most looking forward to, because we're passing from the east of the route, which is, as you've seen, lots of kind of farmland and nice gentle rolling hills, to the west of the route. That's where the proper wilderness begins. And I'm super, super excited about that.
I was not disappointed. As the villages became further and farther between, and the fields rolled away, the landscape became windswept, unkept, marshes and bogland, as far as the eye could see. There was no hint of civilization, or even cars on the road, for mile after mile after mile. I moseyed on through this wonderland with no particular plan in mind, but looking for something intriguing to explore, and then all of a sudden, I found it. The unknown. That sounds good. Now obviously I had no idea what the unknown was, otherwise it wouldn't be an unknown. Well, it would still be the unknown, but it would be a known unknown, rather than an unknown unknown. Heading into the unknown. Not sure what that's going to entail. Obviously, that's by definition. What it entailed at first glance was a car park and some woods, which doesn't feel all that exciting. However, a sign informed me in no uncertain terms that if I walked down the path for just half an hour, I would reach the unknown. Whatever it entailed, the unknown lay somewhere between this dense woodland and the snow-capped mountains in the distance. And with the storm rolling in, I would have to be quick if I wanted to find it. So I packed some essential supplies and some miniatures to paint and headed out.
I am in sort of some thick, dense woods, which are bookended by a vast, wild plain on one side and mountains on the other side. How is this not? How is it even plausible that this could not be Fangorn Forest? Mind the picnic table, Fangorn doesn't have a picnic table. With the plains of Rohan on one side, and of course the Misty Mountains on the other. Get fucking wrecked, New Zealand.
Don't panic. My unbearable smugness would soon wear off as I walked on and on and on and on.
So just FYI, I've walked about an hour down this track, which I assumed was a footpath only, to reach what looks like a car park about 200 metres up the way there. No sign of the unknown, if the unknown is indeed a tangible thing. And as this kind driver is about to demonstrate, I could have just driven it the whole time. It's perfectly drivable. This has been a colossal waste of my time. Yep. Fuck you.
Out of spite, I gave up immediately and searched instead for a peaceful spot in the woods to have lunch and do a spot of painting. This session was just about getting the washes down.
The first thing I'm doing is, perhaps unsurprisingly, going to be the green, characteristic green of Rohan. And for that, again, unsurprisingly, I'm washing with Athonian Athonian Camo Shade. I always call it Athonian Camel Shade, which I think would be a vastly superior name. Yeah. Just working up some of that. For the scales, we're obviously using Nuln Oil, unless they're copper scales, in which case we're going to use Druki Violet.
With these older miniatures, I tend to find you want quite a heavy wash to create a pronounced black line in place of the natural crenulations of a more modern sculpt.
It's actually so peaceful painting here. Painting outside is a faff. I'm never going to lie to anyone if they ask me what it's like to paint outside and if it's worth it. It is a faff. I mean, for one, if you're forgetful like me and you forget a key component of your painting setup and you walk for an hour up a hill, that is a bummer. I tell you, that really does sort of take the wind out of your sails. But when you get it right, it'd just be so calming. Now for Eowyn's horse, even though it is quite a ready horse, and therefore Reichland Flesh Shade is probably the right wash. I'm going to use Agrax, otherwise I'm going to find it hard to distinguish between the leathers and the horse. Who doesn't love washing a horse in a strictly painty sense?
I guess some people do probably like washing horses in a literal sense, but that's not what I'm talking about here.
Right, last in this little stint is going to be Reichland Flesh Shade for the leathers, as previously alluded to. Forgive me. Oh.
The wash on the leathers can be slightly lighter because we're going to be doing some glazing on them later anyway, but it's just a good starting point.
Right, time to crack on. Remind me, I've got to get water. I think I'm low on, I haven't checked my gas. I think I'm low on water and gas, and I'm slightly concerned that there's not going to be anywhere for me to pick any up. Obviously gas I can muddle through without, because I've got the little gas heater separately, but water, if I don't have water, what am I going to use to wash my brushes with? That's rain. Rain then, I guess.
I'd cross that bridge when I came to it. For the moment, I just packed up and headed off. As we headed west, the terrain became much more hilly. Whilst there were villages, they became fewer and farther between. I found literally nowhere, even for the bare essentials. Before long, I reached the Kyle of Tongue Causeway, an enormous crossing over this shallow water loch. It just about marked the halfway point for my journey, and if I thought the east side was sparsely populated, I hadn't seen anything yet. As I headed west, I climbed and climbed, until eventually I came across the most stunning view of the trip so far.
Unbelievable.
This is Loch Erebol, a 16-kilometre body of seawater that boasts well-preserved Bronze Age architecture, as well as rather enticing turquoise waters that I assume are exceptionally cold. It completely blew me away. However, without a corner shop or mini-mart in sight, my mind soon turned back to my impending water shortage.
Okay, problematically, nowhere is open for me to buy water from, but I think I found a solution.
Now the loch is salt water, so I couldn't use that. I had to get a little bit more creative.
That's the first time I've ever had to get my paintbrush washing water from an actual waterfall before.
After driving well into the afternoon, I arrived on the west coast and into the rain. I made the day's last spur-of-the-moment sightseeing stop for the day. It began with a walk down the cliffside into this picturesque, if not quite damp by this point, little cove.
So, Lord of the Rings set designers, do you need a cave in which Frodo, Sam and Smeagol can be captured by Faramir and his rangers? Well, as I'm sure you'd say, no worries, mates. Scotland's got you fucking covered. This is Smoo Cave in Scotland. So not only is it some epic rock formation that would be ideal for some key Lord of the Rings scenes, but it's also got a fantastic name to boot. Oh my god. It really is quite magnificent.
Smoo Cave is formed by both saltwater and freshwater, and its name is thought to originate from the word smuga, from Norse, meaning hiding place, adding to its already ample mystique.
It's funny because out here, the water is very calm, almost motionless, but I can hear as I get closer into the cave. Obviously that's not going to remain the case. I'm actually getting splashed with the spray, and I can feel the force of the air moving past me as a result of what's happening a good 10 or 15 meters away. That's caves then. Off the list.
Mercifully too, it seemed that during my time in the cave, the weather had finally eased. I think this one shot captures Scottish weather pretty well. We've got hail in the foreground, shadowing mist on the left, and sunlit clear skies on the right. Now, the reason I've driven all this way is because in my Google Maps sleuthing, I'd found an amazing spot, demarked as wild camping, in a fantastic location right on the beach. It had taken a long time to get here, but if the pictures and reviews were to go by, it was going to be worth it.
It's that moment of trepidation where you find out what kind of a place you've come to.
As it happened, the kind of place I'd come to was the closed kind.
No overnight parking, it says there. Oh my god. It like no longer exists. The campsite just no longer exists. It used to be that you parked just down there and it was a wild camping spot, but it's advertised on Google. But it no longer exists. Now it's no overnight parking. You know, I might just entirely ignore the sign, and if I get moved on, I get moved on. That's probably the plan.
As the light dwindled, and before I could move on to any new components to paint, I had to live up to the commitment I made myself earlier in the day and finish all the basing and washing. Day turned to night in the time that it took. This work included painting them all regal golds with Retributor armour, and basing any red cloth and wood with corn red. Reds, blacks and silvers were washed liberally with Nuln oil. This process was more time consuming than I'd expected and took me well into the dead of night. Druchii Violet was used to wash all the Balthazar gold areas, which comes out as a dirtier, more coppery gold. Whilst I've not covered much in this little painting blitz, it's because it's all quite dull stuff I'd covered earlier in the video. However, I actually got quite a lot done, but I was exhausted still and decided it was time to turn in for the night. On day 3, the wind had died down and the sun was out, so it was a convenient moment for me to hit up one of Britain's remotest beaches, Sandwood Bay. This would be my pitch for the Grey Havens in the Gulf of Lune, the picturesque and remote seaport where the elves depart for the Undying Lands. Whilst the car park was actually just a stone's throw away, with the journey being covered in its entirety in this time-lapse video, that is more than can be said for the beach itself. The beach was just over 4 miles from the nearest road, so of course that had to be completed on foot.
This is clearly going to be one windy walk, so it's a hats-on kind of situation. Yeah.
I had a lot of ground to cover and I needed to be making good progress. So it was unfortunate that I was immediately distracted by this splendid horse. I did eventually manage to escape the horse's wily charms and made a break for the beach.
The footpath is breaking down.
I do not begrudge Scotland one moment of this walk, and I ask formally that it never simplify or expedite the route.
Okay, I've been walking for just over an hour and the sea is finally hoving into view. However, before we get to it, I've got one small detour I have to make. That house down there is the last bit of a settlement that was abandoned not too far off 200 years ago. You can see actually that there's further ruins over that way, Clearly there was a building there at some point, and now it's basically just the foundations. And the sheep are using the area it's created as a neat little demarked grazing area. It's such a beautiful little old structure. It cut actually quite an evocative silhouette against the light over the hills in the background.
There have apparently been a significant number of shipwrecks at Sandwood Bay Beach, and legend has it that when this cottage was a cottage, it was plagued by the spectral apparition of a lost sailor. One thing is for sure, in 1941 a Spitfire crash-landed at the beach. Whilst the pilot survived unharmed and the body of the plane was recovered, the engine was left in place, and apparently it is sometimes uncovered by the wind.
I have arrived at what is quite aptly described as Britain's most beautiful beach. Absolutely staggering. Although then so is Blackpool Beach. So it's also just utterly deserted. I've never had a beach to myself before, but I very much do have this beach to myself, save maybe for seals and otters, which I'm hoping to find. I mean, it does occur to me, it must be half a dozen miles before the next human being exists in any direction. And I don't think I've ever in my life been able to say that before. You know, think about it. When are you ever 6 miles from the next living person? Wish me luck as I try and get down that hill without falling over. It really is extraordinarily steep. And it's pretty high up as well. I mean, I know it's sand, but still. I've got a lot of gear on me. We all know there's only one way to approach a problem like this. It's a way that we learned in childhood. And that's, don't lose momentum. Don't lose momentum. Don't lose momentum. See? I mean, I don't know how I'm going to get back up, but I'm down. One step at a time. You know, honestly, I genuinely was wondering whether or not I should even come here. I thought to myself this morning, how different can a beach be? Just go to any old beach. This is unimaginable. It's I regret very deeply that I will not be able to do justice to it on video. I've brought with me the paint to do the first little bit of highlighting, and that is going to be the green cloaks. Obviously, if you're going to spend all our time on one component in a Rohan model, it's going to be the cloaks. They are a definitive component if you're painting your Rohan like they are in the movies, of course, and they are a large component. Oh God. Oh God. No. God damn it! Come back! As I was saying, if you're going to spend a long time on one of the components, it's going to be the cloak. They draw in the eye. And when you've got your masked Rohan together, a lot of the time, particularly looking from your side of the table, you should have the backs of your Rohan to you. It's what you're going to see if you want to make it look good. Now, I'm going to be doing some wet blending here on the beach, apparently, if all my technology survives. So, getting a dollop of wild flesh. And see here on Irwin, what we're doing is painting the top sides of the cloaks, ignoring the bottom side entirely. There is a grain of sand on my paintbrush because it's the top side of the cloaks that will be catching the light, obviously. The more highlighty areas.
I'm afraid with all the excitement, I didn't really overcome the logistical difficulties of filming on the beach and therefore didn't really get any usable shots of the actual painting, so you won't really see any, but green is covered again later in the trip. Whilst this was an absolute faff, I stayed as long as I could possibly justify. This is one of my favourite painting locations ever. It is matched only by the New Forest and its many ponies. Once I'd finished painting, I walked the length of the beach looking for seals, shipwrecks and Spitfire engines, all things I'd been led to believe the beach would be simply littered with, and yet I found none of them. You win some, you lose some, I guess. I'm not going to lie, the return journey felt like an absolute age. But, after a while, the faintest signs of civilization hoved back into view.
These shoes have been with me for years. I think they might be about at the end of their working life.
After my feet had been suitably warmed, I was back on the road. Soon, I'd be leaving the main road for the famous drive through a Sint, a long and winding single-track route through the hills, woods and waterways of the northwest of Scotland. It is known for being beautiful and treacherous in equal measure. The road was certainly winding, steep and narrow, but I think the thing I had the most to be concerned about was that I wanted to stop every 50 yards to gawp at the view.
That lurching feeling in your stomach.
While these clips are rolling, I'll take the opportunity to say that this is one of my favourite days ever. And now I know how that sounds. How can you possibly choose a favourite day out of the myriad of days that you have and the many multitudes of ways in which you can experience joy and happiness? It sounds inherently silly, like the kind of thing a toddler would say when asked by their parents whether or not they enjoyed their third and therefore least inspiring visit to Westmorland Safari Park, because that's what they think their parent wants to hear. But, and do forgive me if this gets into TMI territory, but as someone who's had their own issues with mental health in the past, it's tough to overstate how much therapeutic value I've found in the van, whether or not it's going away on weekends with my friends or going and filming big adventures for the channel.
It's narrow.
Recent years have seen a marked change in me, and I ascribe that in no small part to days exactly like this one. Between the beach, this astounding drive, having miniatures to paint and being about as far away from London as it's possible to get without having to take a plane or a boat. Not a day goes by when I'm not daydreaming about my next trip, so it's a big deal when they come together. Whilst this was a long trek, taking the majority of the afternoon, I did eventually, and to my regret, rejoin the main road. I was leaving the farthest reaches of the route, and I was hoping this would mean I would find somewhere to eat. Spoiler alert, I did not. The eating out drought continued. However, I did find another spot with no prohibition on overnight parking, with fantastic views and, most importantly of all, with free, open, clean public toilets. There'd be no shitting in a tub for me this evening. Given I had once again utterly failed to find anywhere to grab something to eat, I had a luxurious holiday dinner of soup and bread. Still, this was nice and quick and it gave me plenty of time to crack on with the painting. This was good because I was now falling dramatically behind. I was not far off halfway through the holiday, but I was a long way off halfway through the painting.
Whilst you're on a bit of a cloak spree, might as well do Mary's as well, because of course he's not wearing a green Rohan cloak. He is wearing his elven cloak. Now I've got the fortune of having already painted one of these before from the Mary that comes with the Treebeard kit. I'm just obviously going to wash it in Nuln oil which is no big surprise.
I then started building up the highlights through Dawnstone, Administratum and Ulthuan Grey, a very neutral palette. If areas got too bright, or there was too sharp a definition between the highlights, I would glaze back down with non-oil. I found this to be an exceptionally satisfying part of the process. In an army that's got so much repetition and where you're painting in batches, having a single feature, one Hobbit cloak that you can start to finish and know that it's done, feels like a breath of fresh air. Who doesn't like checking things off their to-do list?
Right, I am happy enough with that. It's taken about 10 minutes after the wash, and it's really nice, dynamic grey.
Next it was time to paint some white colours, which appear on shield details and on banners. For me, that starts with a base of Grey Seer.
As you can see, at some point in the past few years, I've done a very rushed job of trying to base this horse.
Contrast paints never really found their way into my rotation, except for Apothecary White. Amazing for glazing with, and it goes fantastically over Grey Seer to get some very nice graduated highlights. This works particularly nicely in getting a bit of interest in the very flat details and patterns on the front of the Rohan shields.
So what we're going to do, very predictably, is mix up through Grey Seer, through Ulthuan and White on the brighter side, and on the darker side we're just going to use Contrast Apothecary, but mixed down with Contrast Medium. Let's catch the ear. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit of White Scar into the mix. Let's go high to start with, just to see how bright that is. Actually, that's alright, that's okay. Sadly, I didn't bring Contrast Medium, so we're going to have to use Lamia Medium. You can see the sand on the palette. So you want to brush it in from both directions. Just sit in the middle there.
After this, I edge highlighted the whole pattern with a pure white. Next it was time to do the leathers, and I started predictably by just painting back up to the base colour Doomball Brown. Ignore the white on the banner here because I forgot to actually come back and do it after I did the shields. After basing back up, I mixed in some Tuskor fur into the Doomball mix, keeping it mainly Doomball because on the flatter areas I want to make it a nice gradual transition. Then essentially rinse and repeat, bring more Tuskor fur into the mix, and reapply in a more focused way, blah 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 blah.
This time, more focused.
Finally, of course, we're just into edge highlighting territory. For this, it's worth adding just a drop of white to the Tuskor fur, but keeping it quite subtle so that it doesn't just become a kind of vomity pink. Nobody wants that. With that, the leathers were done, and it was time for me, at last, to hit the hay for the night. So we're leaving part 1 of the video here, hopefully before it outstays its welcome, and part 2 will be up in about a week's time. Now please do remember, I had to borrow a lot of likes and subscribes to open this channel in the first place, and if I don't pay them back, the YouTube loan sharks will break my thumbs. So I'd be grateful if you could help me out. A shout out, as always, to the fantastic members of the Hobby Vanguard, my Buy Me a Coffee membership scheme. The link is in the description. Join before the end of June to enter a raffle to win limited edition Easterling or Angmar dice, and thank you very much for watching. So, whatever I expected the unknown to end up being, I really didn't expect this, an 8-foot tall metal skeleton statue. I genuinely can't decide whether I'm relieved or disappointed that I didn't go and see it.